Good noon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Just before this, Daniela was mentioning that this is by far the largest list of registrants that we've had for a webinar like this. So looks like everybody wants to keep an eye on AI, right? Uh, let's get into this right away. We want to kind of really figure out what's the exponential potential for the insurance industry when it comes to AI. Uh, I'll probably first do some introductions. Brandon, if you can move to the next one, please. Thank you. So we've got on the call Brandon, and he's Xceedance's digital and AI officer. He's based in Germany, so it's like 4 a.m. in the morning for him. So, yeah, but his job is very simple. It's advise and help Exceedance's insurance clients on how to incubate Gen AI into daily operations of their business in a very safe and responsible way. His ex UI has done all this all his life, and I'm sure you'll relish the conversation that we'll have today. And then at the same time, we also have me on the call, Pratik Vichavargya, flag bearer for Exceedance in the region, based in Sydney. And I'll probably pose some questions on behalf of the audience, and then we'll try to kind of really see how the overall conversation goes. Next slide, please, Brad. So agenda, we just after this slide, we'll hand it over to Brandon, and he will be setting the stage so as to bring everybody on the same page in terms of what's Gen AI and how that's applicable for the insurance industry. Post that, we'll open it up for Q&A, and at the end, we'll have closing remarks. There'll be a decent amount of time left for Q&A, so please don't feel shy. Just pose your questions, and we'll try our best to kind of really answer those questions. With that, let's get going, and I'll hand over the baton to Brandon.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pratik, and thank you for the very kind introduction. So hello again, good morning, good noon, good evening, wherever you are. So again, Brandon Nuttall, Chief Digital and AI Officer for Xceedance. And I guess just to set the stage, and I'm sure that as industry leaders on the call, we've all had a very similar experience over the last 2 years. Half of the time, I think, this is going to change the world, but I don't quite know how. And the other half of the time is vendors are constantly calling me, telling me that they're going to change the world. And it's really, really difficult for me to kind of decide which is hype and which is hope, right? And so, what I've done and what I've had to do, and I think what we're all trying to do as industry leaders is trying to find a methodology and a system for thinking kind of in a structured way about how AI is going to be changing our industry, and actually what does safe implementation and safe scaling of AI look like pragmatically for us as leaders. So this is not going to be a death by PowerPoint webinar. I've got a few brief slides just to set the scene. And then realistically, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to set up a scaffold to have a good discussion. We have plenty of people on the call. We've got plenty of people that have got great ideas, and I'm really looking forward to getting your questions. So I'm very interruptible. If there's any questions at any time throughout the call, please drop them in the chat. And then the moderators they will feel free to interrupt me and ask questions in flow as they come up. So I guess, and just reflecting on what I said, so I think that one of the biggest challenges that we have as an industry when it comes to AI, right, is what does it mean to be a pragmatic leader when you're thinking about how AI is going to be changing your business, given the rapid change we're seeing in our industry, right? So, I think that from an AI perspective right now, we've really seen two Sputnik moments, that really got everybody to kind of sit up and pay attention. The first, of course, being ChatGPT at the end of 2022, November. which really kind of convinced people that, more than a lot of the traditional machine learning techniques that we've been using for decades at this point, really convinced people that actually maybe there is something in the generative AI concept for us. And then more when, DeepSeek came out toward the beginning of this year, and there actually was just a new checkpoint for DeepSeek released yesterday, which is apparently quite good. Again, kind of showing organizations that, big AI is not just going to be the provenance of the rich, the wealthy, the massive AI labs. Really, as an organization, you could really think very tactically about how you can apply AI yourself as a sovereign capability. And so this is really opening up a lot of interesting conversations for what does pragmatic generative AI implementation look like for the insurance industry. And so the framework that we've established as an organization, this is the framework I'm using internally as well, right? This is not just a marketing slide. It's really kind of breaking up the time periods that we're in as kind of now, next, and beyond, right? Now being, what are the capabilities that exist like literally right now that are pragmatic to implement by 2025 end? Next being, how do we foresee the capabilities maturing as we move into 2026 and especially 2027? A, as the technologies mature, B, as the vendor space matures, C, as our willingness as leaders to take risks around AI matures, D, as the regulators mature. And so we'll talk a lot about how do we evolve the AI we should be thinking about implementing now into then what capabilities that unlock for us next. And then finally, beyond. And, I don't know about you guys. I don't have a working crystal ball. So it's very, very difficult for me to draw and make a straight line extrapolation from 2027 out to 2030, particularly given the pace at which things have been moving. But what I do want to do is I do want to touch on what are some of the frontier capabilities that are coming into focus now that can fundamentally change the way that we think about problem solving and applying knowledge in insurance. So let me start with now. And I guess from a now perspective, I'm thinking about, what are capabilities that are safe to build and scale now, and what do they have in common, right? And I think the one theme that sits behind the use cases and the market traction that we're getting and kind of where insurance organizations are comfortable investing, it's really in the human machine teaming space, right? So the idea is that, from an organizational change management perspective, from a tech transformation perspective, the business functions of the insurance company are still primarily human orchestrated, right? If you do it with a human without AI today, realistically, you'll do that same process almost certainly with the same human, but being supported with AI tomorrow, right? So the AI in this case is human in the loop, and it's directly in support of human intelligence. So a really good example of this is, I'm sure knowledge chatbots are things people have been thinking about on this call for the better part of 6 months. But I think what's really, really interesting about the potential of even a very, very simple knowledge chatbot, and I'll talk about this a little bit when I get to next, is that, you could have a really, really good human in your organization that you can rely on to apply good judgment almost all the time, right? 5 good years of experience, good analytical mindset. They almost always do the right thing when underwriting a particular class of business or managing a particular claim, right? But the fundamental thing about the way they're able to orchestrate their expertise is that, they really only have sight to the claims that they've experienced, the underwriting cases they've experienced, right? And so they're basing their wisdom and their judgment on 5 years of data or 10 years of data. If you're an organization which is, 30 years old and you have 30 years of data, right? Putting more of that data at the fingertips of the humans that are actually executing your process, it will have the effect of making your process safer and more assured to run over the long run, right? Another good example is around video and audio analysis, and I'll give you an interesting case study. And so I know of an insurer in the UK that is using generative AI basically to look at Instagram and TikTok posts and find basically instances of people street racing and doing things bad with cars, and then basically automatically picking up the license plates out of that sort of video feed, and then turning that into potential underwriting issues in the back-end system. So really, it's about, where can we use and leverage AI to basically generate work for humans to then look at, or to basically facilitate the humans that are already in our operating model, already in our delivery model. So that's the view of now, right? And I think I'll talk about next, and then I'll pause for a minute. What's really interesting about investing in the now capabilities is what it unlocks for next, right? Because, and I'll take the knowledge chatbot as an example, right? And it seems a very simple example, but bear with me. So you move from a world where the human is the primary mover of business functions, and the machine intelligence is basically in support. You move into a world where the human and the machine are participating much more kind of from a 50-50 basis, right? So the human is still supplying the judgment and the insight, but in terms of the knowledge that the bots can unlock, actually the knowledge is human equivalent, if not in particular cases better, right? So for instance, if you take the case of the knowledge chatbot, right? So realistically, in an insurance context, as you build trust, as you add nines of reliability to the knowledge chatbot and to the data that the knowledge chatbot is able to crunch through, you basically move from a system which is a passive reservoir of knowledge to a system which is actually capable of essentially, duplicating, recreating the good judgments which were made in the past and extrapolating those and applying those to future cases. The idea being, instead of the human kind of passively using the knowledge chatbot to add more information into a process to make a better decision, you're essentially using the knowledge chatbot instead as a next best action solver. And the knowledge chatbot, rather than passively waiting for the human to interact with it, will instead pragmatically and proactively come with a recommendation, right? Or an assertion, or a next best action, or a next best step, right? And basically give the human, rather than being an opt-in, giving the human more of an opt-out, right? And I think there's a couple of things that this has the potential to unlock, right? So the first thing is, particularly when I think about the processes that are most amenable to automation, the process we've all been trying to automate for the last 10 years, right? Underwriting, claims, customer service, a lot of these key use cases. Those things really, the key of a lot of those automation projects has been, automate the things that are routine, and unlock the ability for humans to apply knowledge and judgment to the things that aren't. And I think that it's been difficult to get a lot of value out of those projects because it's difficult, really pragmatically, to identify which activities that happen are truly routine, and then which activities really can you get value from human judgment and wisdom. So realistically, generative AI, more so than traditional automation techniques, because of the way that it deals with context and because of the way it deals with ambiguity, really gives you the capability to think about unlocking those in a way that you haven't unlocked before. So I'll pause right there. Do you have any questions in the chat about now and next before I continue on to beyond?
I don't
Yes,
see
no?
anything on the chat right now, Brandon. But yes, your example of those videos, definitely something I should also be watchful for what I post online.
Oh, I'm just imagining the trouble you get into driving
Exactly.
cars in the
Yeah.
outback. So now let's talk about beyond, and I think this is where things get a little bit science fiction, right? But bear with me. I think there's a lot of good questioning and good thought in the industry about kind of what is the trend line that we are on, right? Are we on a linear trend? Are we on, are we going to get diminishing returns out of AI? Or are we on an exponential trend line, right? So what I've done is when looking into my crystal ball about what is coming from beyond perspective, I'm assuming like the linear growth, right? I do believe that there's a good 30 to 40% chance that actually we're on an exponential trend and not a linear trend. And actually a lot of things that are going to happen in the beyond timeframe might be moved up 2028, 2029. I think it is unlikely that we are on a diminishing returns trend line when it comes to AI. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I think one, if you take a look at the trend line since 2022, it's definitely been curving up, right? And if you look at the assumptions, you look at the investments that a lot of the main AI labs have been making, actually they are investing on the assumption that it will be an exponential trend. So realistically, I see this sort of beyond style capability as almost a conservative estimate of what 2030 will look like in our industry, right? But I firmly believe in the future that we're preparing for as Xceedance, as a service provider to the industry, is how do we operate in a world where the primary mover of most of our key business functions are AI agents and not humans. So you can already see it today, and I see you already see in your businesses that there are decisions that you make in your contact centers, in your claims functions, in your underwriting functions today that are better made by a machine, by an algorithm, than by a human, right? So a very tangible, oversimplified example. When you are writing a rule to validate a financial transaction, um, most often those rules are simply algorithmic, right? You do some validation, you do some heuristic rule sets, and then once you've basically validated that for completion of correctness, only then do you then pass that to a person, right? And mainly because, one, because it's time consuming to do that manually, but two, because it is actually lower risk to have a person or to have a machine do those correctness and completeness checks before then passing that to a human to actually process. I think my personal anecdote here, and this is a story that I really love. Um, so there was a study that was done, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago. I have to find the paper. And it wanted to see how good humans truly were at executing what we thought would be simple tasks. So the researchers came up with a very simple task, right? And this very, very simple task was look at this picture and tell me if this picture contains a carrot or not. A carrot. So you think everybody on this call will be able to look at a picture and say whether or not the picture contains a carrot. Turns out humans are only 94% good at telling whether a picture contains a carrot. So 6 times out of 100, humans are making mistakes as to whether the picture contains or does not contain a carrot. And that's a shocking result to me, right? Because you would think that recognizing pictures of carrots would be a relatively simple use case. But the fact of the matter is humans are remarkably bad at things that we think should be relatively simple. And I think what we will see when we approach 2030 is that there will be more and more classes of problems where passing this class of problem to a machine to execute will overall be less risky than executing that same thing with a human, right? So right now it's correctness and completion of financial transactions. Next, it might be, agentic repair management and, using AI agents to chase up repair SLAs or agentic coordination of home emergency cases, coordinating vendors to tarp the roof and then dry out the inside of the house and then do and basically perform those actions, right? And so what that means is there's a couple of key challenges that are coming at us, right? So the first is that from a change management perspective, the way that we think about the roles of most people in our organizations will change, right? or it is humans will move from being the prime mover of activity to basically being concentrated in 3 lines of defense activity. Essentially, humans will move from doing the work to QAing the work and then auditing the work. And so I think that you could see some green shoots of this sort of thing happening right now. OpenAI has an operator capability that is more than capable of independently making a travel booking at whatever travel website that you want it to make the travel booking at. It understands the difference between subtly different travel booking websites. It will do most of the work and only prompt you for a credit card, right? And if you think about the systems that we all run inside of our organizations and how you could apply agentic AI to them, right? What is a computer interface but an API made for humans, right? As these agents get better at doing unstructured tasks, actually, the computer vision challenges and computer use agents to drive the systems that we all use every day are going to go from being state-of-the-art capabilities, which is what they are now, to being kind of everyday capabilities that we all lean into. So with that kind of as context and backdrop, I wanted to flip to this view, right? And what this is this is essentially the same kind of implementation time frame, a lot of the same use cases that we've been discussing, but I've then added 2 more dimensions, right? I've added a dimension for increasing risk and cost, and then I've added the size of the bubble, right? And the size of the bubble really is, what do I think is the size of the economic opportunity that's currently sitting inside of this? And so, everything that's sitting in the now world, these are things that, we have knowledge or it is our clients that are doing a lot of these things right now with generative AI, right? This is no longer state of the art. A lot of these things are no longer science fiction. These are things that are actively implemented and being used right now in our industry, right? So again, things like video and audio analysis, knowledge bots, um, underwriting assistance, supporting proposals, automated communications drafting, automated generation of sales and prospecting insights. These are all things that, even if you are not using them right now, it is straightforward to point at a peer organization somewhere in the world that is already doing this, right? And so, this is really the low-hanging fruit of generative AI. And I think these are some of the key use cases that we can all use in our industry to start to exercise our generative AI muscle. That's kind of from a now perspective. Leading organizations are moving rapidly from now into next, right? So one of the lowest hanging fruits here really is around triage tools and around maturing knowledge bots to be less kind of passive knowledge bots and more in terms of using the knowledge to automatically generate judgment and then surfacing that judgment to the humans actually working in your organization. And then when we get to beyond, I think that the really, really big thing here, and that I think will really be a massive opportunity and challenge for our industry from a change management perspective, is going to be, how do we all deal with computer use agents? And then how do we all think about the role of the human in our organizations when computer use agents really start to get traction? And kind of why I want to call that out specifically, right, is because every single AI lab that hops onto a podcast, right, for the last 3 months is talking for a good solid quarter of the running time about the challenges and the opportunities of computer use agents. So rather than being something that is kind of a nice to have, but they're working on other products right now, I think the view is this: they recognize the economic opportunity the same way that we do, and they are investing in this to integrate this into their platform so that they can compete and win, right? So, agents that can effectively and efficiently drive a user interface, just like you've currently got deployed, and can interface with telephony systems and can interface with email systems. This is where the labs are driving. And so I think the right time to start thinking about that change management is now. Then finally, and I promised that this was not going to be death by PowerPoint. So this is my last slide. So I think this is super interesting and important. And I'll talk about my organizational challenge now as I'm thinking about safely scaling AI, right? We are in a very heavily regulated industry, right? And so when I'm thinking about building platforms for the future and deploying AI into the market, right? When you look at yourself and you think about doing, an AI proof of concept, right? And I'm sure everybody on this call has been involved in something like that. You come up with a backlog of opportunities and it's got maybe 20 things on it, right? 20 things you want to do. I firmly believe that we are going to move from a world where we do 20 things a year to when we do 20 things a month, the 20 things a week, and maybe even 20 things a day, right? So really, I think the challenge for all of us is to think about how do we responsibly deploy at that sort of scale? And then how do we safely scale, not just our technology, but also our people to be able to operate in an environment where change is happening that fast, right? And so we have based our responsible, ethical, scaled AI deployment principles kind of in these 4 categories. And we believe that if we do a good job at these 4 things, that we'll be able to unlock safe AI scaling. So I think the first is really proactive regulatory engagement. So one of my problems being Chief Digital and AI Officer for a global organization is that when I implement something AI, I want it to be relevant in California, Colorado, London, Paris, and Sydney, right? And those are 5 wildly different regulatory environments. So really, the only way that you could possibly that could possibly work is to get ahead of the regulator and to basically bake being flexible with how we work with regulators into the fundamental platform. I think the second is around unified governance and monitoring. So I think I speak for a lot of people where, we are really, really, really good at understanding what to do functionally with AI, how to make it work in business terms, right? But I think where we have a gap as an industry is understanding, one, how to handle everything that we need to handle from a non-functional perspective to be safe from a regulatory perspective in the future. And 2, how do we make sure that the AI works as well on day 100 as it does on day 1? So we're investing in unified governance and monitoring that sits across all of our AI use cases. And this has 2 benefits. One is it means that we can build a centralized capability for taking care of all of our AI, no matter how far it scales. And then 2, it means that our innovators, the ones that understand functionally how organizations work, don't have to be overly burdened with all the non-functional aspects of making the AI fundamentally safe. So then third is around ethical AI design, right? I don't need to lecture you guys on how important it is in our industry to act ethically, and baking these things into AI systems that are at least as they come off the shelf, not built for us, is definitely a challenge. So developing tools and techniques to make sure that the ethics of our organization and the ethics of our industry are baked into AI is incredibly important. And then finally, it's about communication, right? I've said it twice before on this call, and I'll say it again, right? AI can, is, and will change the way we all operate in our industry as humans, right? And so getting out in front of the change, investing in change management, helping people understand how their roles and how their skills will change and how they will need to evolve as the technology evolves is absolutely key for bringing the humans on the journey and making this change as good for the human as it is for the shareholder or for the executive. So I'll pause there. That's my slides. So I'm looking forward to taking some questions.
Thanks, Brandon. As you can imagine, there are quite a few questions waiting for you to address. I'll read them
Love
out
it.
for you, and then maybe we can try to kind of answer them. So the first one I can see is from Joel Cameron, and it had got a lot of many likes and a follow-up question. So definitely a popular one.
Okay.
How do we get started using AI? Simple. What AI programs do you suggest an insurance broker use, and what should we use it for? So I think, how do we get cracking today as a broker?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
probably what Joel is referring to.
Yeah. So I'm not here on this call to sell our services or to sell anybody else's services, right? What I would say, right, is that, subject to your organization's infosec, organizations can get a lot of value out of just basic ChatGPT today, right? And that's something that you can procure from any one of a number of vendors, right? And you could procure potentially directly from your cloud provider. So again, I'm not here to sell anything, but basically, if you think about the use cases that you could enable, everything from automated communications drafting, automatic creation of marketing copy, anything where you have text or ideas and want to make those ideas better. Using a relatively simple chatbot it would give you the technical capability to do that. I think where I see organizations struggle, right? And this is something that I've seen personally at least twice, right? Is that if you just go give your organization Copilot, right? If you rock up to Microsoft or whoever, they are more than happy to sell you 150 Copilot licenses at $30 per person per month, right? More than happy. And then you can just give those to people and then say, hey, I've done AI, right? But realistically, if you don't then help people along the journey and help them realize what they can do with this capability, it gets really, really difficult to realize the value of that investment, right? And so I think this is why it's critically important for organizations that are eager to take the first step, but still kind of a bit immature, to really start to think from a change management perspective about specifically what should we use it for, right? And so from our perspective, right, from an industry perspective, there are 20 or 25 really good use cases. I can give you a list. You could also ask ChatGPT. It'll give you the same list of 25, right? So realistically, the generating the ideas is very, very cheap and easy, right? The change management and embedding it into your people, in your organization, so that they get value from it, right? That's a much, much harder lift.
Sure. And I think that's what we've done in-house as well, enable
Mhm.
more and more people with those basic Copilot licenses, and people use it in different ways, right? And there's no limit to this. Alexander had a follow-up on this. Could you split it off based on level of technical expertise and level of skills required to implement?
Could I split off what in terms of level of technical expertise and skills to implement? Because I guess here's the thing, right? So there are AI capabilities that you can use and you can get value from, without actually having much technical expertise, right? And I'll give you a tangible example, right? I've seen in a couple of organizations now where you roll out a tool like a Microsoft Copilot, and you notice people's English in emails starts getting much better, right? Because people start using the actual capabilities inside that tool, basically to start refining the tone and the professionalism that they use when they're writing emails, right? And again, that's relatively low hanging fruit. I think that as we think about maturing our organizations and our capability, I see two trends, right? So the first trend that I see is that humans are going to need to get better at understanding and tagging data. So we need to train our humans to be better data scientists. So let's go back to the kind of contrived example of a carrot, right? If I have a human that is 94% accurate at picking out pictures of carrots, and I have a machine that's 98% accurate, pick out pictures of carrots, that implies two things, right? That implies, one, I want the machine doing everything in the first pass, right? And then two, I need to have a human following after the machine to tag the data that the machine gets wrong, right? Because then you will start feeding that retag data back into the machine and make it so that the machine gets from 98 to 98.5 to 99, and eventually, start add those nines of reliability I was talking about, right? So that's one, is around data science. Two is around how do we leverage platforms like low code, no code platforms to kind of bring more engineering to the fingertips of the people that understand the domain. And what I mean by that, and the message that I'm giving internally, right, is that by 2027, well, certainly by 2030 and possibly by 2027, people doing swivel chair style integrations, right, that should be dead, right? And realistically, because we are removing the need for people to do a lot of the swivel chair integration style stuff, right? It's going to give people and organizations a lot more capacity and capability to think about the way that they solve domain problems. But, and this is my problem internally, right? It's not practical for me to turn around and teach 4,000 Xceedians how to use Python, right? And how to use a compiler. That's never going to be a winning strategy. So really, it's about how do we give the people in our organization that understand the domain the tools, the knowledge, and the skills for them to pragmatically teach and drive computers how to do domain things more effectively and efficiently, right? And I think those are the two big skill sets that we need to think about investing in for our people.
Sure. I'll pick up the next one. There are quite a few of them, so we'll have to take them fast, Brandon. Next one is from John Pora. Do you have an approach for getting our historical data into an AI infrastructure, but still keeping it private? I think he's talking more on the privacy laws and this whole debate on, how do I keep my data and my IP to myself, but still use the benefits of Gen AI? Yeah, absolutely.
So I think going back to the beginning of the conversation when I was talking about Sputnik moments, right? I think that DeepSeek was really that second Sputnik moment. And I think the reason why DeepSeek was such a Sputnik moment is because it really unlocked the potential for what I call sovereign AI. So, the previous thinking was that AI was big and AI was expensive and AI is something that's only and always going to live in the cloud, right? And so DeepSeek comes out, and DeepSeek, look, what is it state of the art right now? It's up there, but it's certainly not, necessarily as good as what OpenAI has or what Google has right now. But I think, and quite important to this conversation, I think that as we approach 2027, DeepSeek and tools like DeepSeek have two things going for them, right? One is that it is good enough, right? And two, most importantly, DeepSeek can be implemented in a sovereign way. And what I say by sovereign is that, it is small enough that you can feasibly run it on your own hardware running in your own data center, right? If you still have a retained data center. And so I think, there's a lot of focus now on kind of, have we gone too much to the cloud? I think this is one of the places where forward-looking organizations that still have some retained data center capacity can think about using some of that space and some of that power for running sovereign AI capability, right? And so thinking about data privacy and how do you handle PII and how do you deal with the regulator, right? You can effectively sidestep a lot of those questions if you run your AI in your data center sitting next to your data and it doesn't go to the cloud. It doesn't go to third parties, right? It is entirely within your control at all times. And particularly given that these smaller models are now becoming much, much, much more capable, it's definitely something that organizations are starting to consider. I think another way to think about it, though, is that if you're already well down your cloud journey, right? And if you already have a tie-in with a Microsoft, if Microsoft already has your data, if Google already has your data, if Amazon already has your data, from a trust perspective, right? For the handling and processing of that data, you must have already reached some sort of agreement or at least comfort with these cloud service providers in terms of handling your data and handling your customers' data. So there's an argument that says, actually, for instance, if you trust Microsoft to hold your PII, it's not much of an extension from that to then trust the OpenAI APIs hosted by that cloud service provider to also be safe. Now, that's of course something for your InfoSec and for your risk departments to understand, right? But that's kind of the second thing to be considering, right? If the data privacy concerns are that great. Of course, what I would not advise blasting PII over the open internet to OpenAI's publicly facing API, right? I mean, that's badness. But the trends towards sovereign AI and the trends toward direct utilization of cloud-hosted AI APIs, that they are clear.
Fair. Next one from Erin. Is AI going to be suitable for thinking outside the box? It may do well at consistent rules that don't need nuance or outside of the box thinking. But what about the thinking that goes outside that? So I think anything that's where the rules are well laid out, they would do well. But what if and there are scenarios where they have to kind of really think on their own? Yeah.
So I think what's interesting is that in the past 2 years there's been a cottage industry of commentators in our market that talk a lot about what AI can't do and will never be able to do, right? And I think that AI and AI researchers and AI labs have basically made this cottage industry of commentators look very silly, right? Because somebody will come out that's nominally well respected and say, AI can never come up with original research or original insights, original outputs. And then, Google comes out just the other week with Alpha Evolve, which came up with and invented a genuinely new algorithm for doing a mathematical technique called matrix multiplication, right? But also has, in effect, saved 1% of Google's entire global server fleet by improving their algorithms they use internally, right? So, for a long time, the meme was, oh yeah, AI could never do anything original. It's just regurgitating things that have already existed at least once before. And I think the fact of the matter is that I think that, at least in frontier capabilities, I think we can finally put that to bed. I think we could finally say that, realistically, the AI that we'll be using in 2027 and certainly by 2030 will be capable of creating unique insights, right? I think the other thing is, and you think about thinking outside the box, I want to make it so that the knowledge workers in my organization, have the time to think outside the box. The thing is, the knowledge workers in my organization spend 90% of their time in the box and 10% of their time outside the box. So really, if I can make my people's time be used more effectively and efficiently by delegating the inside the box stuff to an AI, I will free up more of that human time for truly outside the box thinking.
Fair, yeah. It just gives us more time to kind of do that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Next one from Leah. I think this is an interesting one. Will the extent of the impact of AI drive up the reinsurance cost for cyber risk to the point where these risks become uninsurable? Could
Yeah.
this be a handbrake on adoption?
So I, it's funny. I've got a white paper that's coming out. If it's not out already, in the next couple of weeks, kind of talking about this, right? But basically, the summary is that there are so rather than clubbing AI risk insurance together with cyber, I think the future here is new insurance products kind of in parallel to cyber to help address some of the very specific risks that come out kind of around unlocking AI and unlocking agentic AI for the marketplace. So I'll give you a couple of examples, right? So one example is algorithmic risk insurance, right? And so, it used to be that if you have a driver driving a car and they hit somebody else, right? We have formulas for figuring out that liability, right? But if I have a driver driving a car and an algorithm in that car makes a decision which has an outcome of hitting the car or hitting a pedestrian, right? Who's at fault and how do you insure that risk? And so that product is algorithmic risk insurance, right? I think another aspect of that is actually if I have agents working and interacting with each other, those agents need an economy, right? Because they're supplying services which have a particular value. And so how do those agents transact? And how do you ensure and underwrite the economy that they're actually transacting in, right? And so, there are providers of digital asset insurance that actually could underwrite the currency that these agents use to transact on this marketplace, right? And so actually, rather than necessarily adding to the cost of like a cyber policy, right? Actually, I see this as an opportunity for insurers to launch new products that would be very interesting to a lot of different organizations who are doing AI to basically help assure and ensure the creation of the AI ecosystem because there's effective risk transfer.
Sure. Next one that I had here, I could have them. I think in your picture of now, next, and beyond, Brandon, when do you think the beyond is happening? So the question is, what do you think the time frame is until the computer use agents take over?
So I've have an internal kind of confidence interval, right? And I guess let's take a step back, right? So I think everybody here that has ever been in a meeting with the techies in your organization has probably heard about the word API ecosystem, right? And so the whole concept and the promise of the API ecosystem, right, was that if you created some APIs and you put them out into the internet, you put them out into your organization, people would be able to find them and snap them together like building blocks, right? And so I think that as an industry, we've spent a lot of time building APIs, right? But have we actually used the APIs the way that we thought we were going to use the APIs when we built them in the first place, right? And I think what's ended up happening, the trajectory we've been on is a lot of the APIs we built have been too bespoke to a particular application. They've been, they've been single purpose. And actually, if you come back rather than recomposing what you've already built, you end up building something from scratch. So I think when I take that and I apply that to computer use agents, right? We we know that we have an API that we use to run our business that works, right? And that is the UX that humans use. There's nothing interesting or special about that UX. It is just another way to interact with the underlying system. And the barriers and the blockers to using that directly um, are not kind of fundamental research questions. These are all things that have been done in other applications. They've just not been done yet for our industry, right? Um, so computer vision is straightforward. Um, developing an algorithmic understanding of the structure of a policy, the structure of a claim, right? Relatively straightforward. But so really it takes an organization or a company that wants to tie those things together and actually create a platform and create a solution. That's the bit that's missing, is picking up these building blocks and actually snapping them together to make that computer use capability. So I see that kind of with a low level of confidence in 2027 and with a high level of confidence in 2030. Um, the one thing that I would do, if you guys are geeky, and I'll take 30 seconds to geek out here. There's a really interesting podcast that came out just the other day by a commentator that I follow called Dvarkesh Patel, right? And this podcast gets a bit geeky, but there's a couple things in here that I think are relevant to the conversation. Sorry, I'm looking away because I'm copying the links. I could drop it in the chat. I think that the biggest thing here is that the big AI labs have unlocked basically a machine learning technique called reinforcement learning, and they've unlocked it for large language models. And so what that means, and they explain this in the podcast, is that really what you need to unlock these big language models and make them work for a new domain is basically interested people in the research lab that want to solve a particular problem and have the time and the bandwidth to basically run reinforcement learning to make the model better at this particular kind of problem, right? And so as these things mature and as the demand becomes more apparent, one of these big AI research labs is going to do RL for a computer use agent on an insurance system, right? It's inevitable. It might be next year, it might be 2027, but all of a sudden, somebody might coming out of OpenAI or coming out of Anthropic with a bot that is spectacular at managing claims on Duck Creek, right? And that capability will come, it won't be like a gradual ramp of capability. It won't be a thing where it's mediocre until it's great. Actually, it will be bad, 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 and then it will be like great in a day. And that's really the power of leveraging reinforcement learning for these sorts of things. So if that interests you, that podcast is really interesting. I like that a lot. But that's kind of how I see it going. It'll be, March 2027, nothing will work, and then April 2027, everything will work. But that's just the nature of the way, reinforcement learning works and how it will work when it's applied in this context.
Sure, and thanks for sharing the link, Brandon. I know we are conscious of the time, but there are quite a few questions on the whole API and the tech stack. In fact, one of them is if we were to design something that was Gen AI ready for the future, what are the things to keep in mind for that technology solution?
Yeah. So Gen AI works best when you feed it structured data, right? One of the powers of Gen AI is that it can make some sense out of unstructured data, which is great for a lot of applications. But fundamentally, it still works best with well-formed structured data, right? So I think my first piece of advice would be understand your data strategy. Your data strategy and the way your data strategy feeds into tech platform selection is going to be critically important, right? I think in the future, and certainly the future I'm preparing my organization for, we're going to have a lot more people that are effectively data scientists than we have today, right? And understanding data, tagging data, understanding why a decision was made the way it was made based on the underlying data is going to be incredibly important and increasingly important, right? Um, so then I think the second thing is from a tech platform perspective is those interface touch points where you are turning unstructured data to structured data or vice versa. Those are some of the hinge points that I see for making tech selections, right? Because that is one of the key most important things to get right. Because realistically, we're still in a world where it's very garbage in, garbage out. So for instance, one of the key use cases, and I'm sure everybody here is so sick of it, I am too. But the number of organizations that do document data extraction in the world, including us, by the way, it's insane at how many organizations do this. But the reason is because there is so much demand, and actually, data is the currency of AI, right? So unlocking the value in your unstructured data and then feeding that through AI systems, that's really, that's really the currency, that's the fuel, right? So those are some of the more hingy tech decisions that you can make. But then from a kind of a core platform perspective, right? And this is, so long as the core platform stores data logically and exposes the data in a way that is sensible to the human, right? Intuitively, it will be sensible to the AI that's going to be operating that system in the future as well, right? So I think from a tech platform system perspective, I'm not here to sell anything. I think most of the AI platforms, most of the core system platforms, most of the ancillary platforms that are currently on the market were designed with this in mind in the first place, right? I would say, watch out for, systems that are essentially kind of, new Chrome, a new face on an old system, because ergonomically it might work, but actually in the back end, the data is not being stored in a way that's easily consumable. But even then, right, it could be, given where computer use agents are developing, that could be a 2027 problem, but not necessarily a 2030 problem.
Sure. Thanks, Brandon. I'm conscious of the time. We've just gone past 1 p.m. here in Australia. So I think it's time we wrap this up. But one thing I would want to mention is none of the questions or any time at the discussion did we hear about, hey, does that mean a risk to our jobs and what do we do and all of it. It tells that everybody's excited and everybody wants to kind of really build and enable themselves with Gen AI. So all the very best. And if you want to kind of really follow up on some of these conversations, please feel free to reach out to Brandon or myself. Our email addresses are in the chat.
Yeah.
Brandon, anything you want to say?
No, I just close by echoing that message, right? The world does not need fewer insurance practitioners. The world needs more insurance, right? And so I think we all have the ability and the capability to embrace the change and to win and grow, right? And so really, I think it's about how do we understand, how do we embrace this, how do we use this to win, how do we use this to deliver more insurance to the people who need it, right? So I'm really looking forward to going the journey with you guys and looking forward to receiving all of your emails.